So, what if you were standing right there, in the very presence of God, but you couldn't hear a single thing he was saying? Now, this isn't just some hypothetical question. It's a real historical moment. And honestly, it might be more relevant to us today than we'd like to admit. Let's get into it. I mean, just imagine that for a second. Someone is speaking your native tongue, plain as day, but the words just don't register. This isn't about an accent or a dialect. Jesus is pointing to something much, much deeper, a fundamental inability to hear. It's a profound and, frankly, a pretty terrifying diagnosis. And get this whole story takes place in the most sacred spot on earth, the temple in Jerusalem. And the audience? Well, it's not just a random crowd. These are the religious experts, the devout, the people who had spent their entire lives studying the very scriptures that pointed directly to this moment. So Jesus starts with this incredible offer. And notice, it's not a new rule to follow or another ritual to perform. It's an invitation into a real relationship with his teaching, a path to ultimate freedom through truth. The real key here is that word abide. This has nothing to do with just showing up on the weekend or nodding along with some ideas. It means to dwell in his word, to let it be the very air you breathe, the house you live in. We're talking total immersion, not just a casual visit. And here's the shocking twist. Despite all their knowledge, despite being the most religious people in the entire nation, they were completely incapable of accepting this offer. Something was blocking them. Something was fundamentally broken. You know, Jesus really doesn't pull any punches here. He goes right to the source of their spiritual deafness. He tells them their core allegiance isn't actually to God, the source of all truth, but to a nature that is totally opposed to it. And that's why his words sounded like a foreign language. Then, as if things weren't intense enough, he raises the stakes to a level they just could not imagine. He moves from offering freedom to this ultimate promise, eternal life, for anyone who doesn't just hear, but actually keeps his word. Death itself loses its power. Their reaction is, well, pretty much what you'd expect. Total disbelief, outrage, and arguments. They start accusing him of being possessed. They just can't wrap their minds around what he's saying. So he decides to cut through all that noise with one final, unmistakable statement. Now, this is not just some weird figure of speech. Those two words, I am, are a direct callback to the book of Exodus, when God reveals his divine name to Moses at the burning bush. Jesus is making an absolutely unambiguous claim. He is God. And believe me, every single person in that crowd knew exactly what he meant. All the confusion from before, it just vanished. In an instant, the meaning was crystal clear. And this, right here, reveals a really terrifying pattern. As long as his words were sort of confusing and metaphorical, they just argued with him. But the second his identity became clear, the response wasn't faith. It was violence. They literally picked up stones to execute him on the spot. But this intense, crazy moment in the temple wasn't just a one-off thing. No, it was actually the climax of a pattern that had been repeating for centuries, a tragic echo all throughout Israel's history. Just think about this pattern. God literally told the prophet Isaiah, "Go speak to people who will hear the sound of your voice, but will never understand the meaning." The prophet Jeremiah, he was beaten and thrown in a muddy pit for speaking God's truth. Ezekiel's powerful words were treated like entertainment, like a beautiful song that you enjoy for a moment and then completely ignore. And Micaiah got slapped across the face for telling a king something he didn't want to hear. It's this repeating cycle, you see. God sends a clear message. The established religious system, the very people who were supposed to be listening, are the first ones to push back. And because of that, the person telling the truth often ends up isolated or worse, persecuted. So all this history brings this ancient repeating pattern right to our doorstep. It forces us to look past the old stories and ask ourselves a much more personal and maybe uncomfortable question. You know, it's so easy for us to look back and judge that crowd in the temple, or the kings who rejected the prophets. But we have to ask, is this ancient problem of spiritual deafness still around? Is it possible we could be guilty of the exact same thing? It really boils down to this conflict. Are we truly abiding in the word, letting it actually change us, even when it's hard? Or are we just performing religion, going through the motions, seeking comfort, and just looking for affirmation of what we already think? And here's the sobering reality that this whole biblical pattern points to. Just being close to sacred things doesn't guarantee a spiritual connection. It is entirely possible to be in the right place, saying all the right words, and still miss the voice of God completely. Okay, so if that's the problem, this deep-seated inability to hear, what in the world is the solution? What's the timeless invitation that can actually cut through all the religious noise and our own inner resistance? Well, the answer is exactly the same one that Jesus offered in the temple 2,000 years ago. It's not some new program or a better system. The antidote to spiritual deafness is to consciously, actively, and continuously abide in His Word. And what that means is choosing the living Word over all the other stuff we tend to build around it. It means putting truth ahead of cultural trends, ahead of our own personal comfort, ahead of our familiar routines, and yep, even ahead of the very structures of religion itself. And that's the fundamental difference, isn't it? One is a system of rules and rituals that you perform. The other is a dynamic, living relationship with God through His Word that leads to real, authentic, eternal life. And really, that's the ultimate question that this whole story leaves us with. It's a question that's worth sitting with for a while. Is your connection with God about checking off a list of duties, or is it the very source of your vitality, your freedom, and your hope? Now, this might all seem a little abstract, but in our next explainer, we're going to make it very, very concrete. We're going to look at hard data that shows just how widespread this spiritual deafness might be today, even among our leaders. And I'll tell you, the numbers are shocking. We really hope you'll join us for that.